All right, the time has come to finish this off and then to submit it. So I created this layer at the very top called Clone Stamp. And I promised that this layer would be like a texture fill for our landscape. It would bring everything together. It would make everything wonderful. It will tie your shoes for you. So what do I do with it? Well, the Clone Stamp tool, this is a new tool for us, is right here under the brush. And you just want the regular Clone Stamp tool at the top. This is designed as a retouching tool in Photoshop. We need to set it up first. So you want to set it up to be a manageable size that's pressure sensitive like we've used, and a hardness that's fairly soft, so maybe between 20 and 30. And you want to set its opacity to also not be too strong, so maybe between 30 and 40. And then you want to sample all layers. Okay? So what this tool does, it's a little tricky to explain, to talk about, so I'm just going to show you. If I want a texture, like say I want these crystals to also be over here, on a new layer at the very top, I can hold down Option, and that will turn my cursor into a target, and I can click on where I want to copy from, and then it will allow me to paint that texture in at whatever opacity I set somewhere else. So it's basically a copy and paste tool that can be used like a brush. So if I wanted those crystals to maybe be on the underside right here, get a little bit of that crystalline structure, I could do that. Now, I've got all these kind of little gold nuggets there. You'll notice that it follows with me. So as I paint, my target follows with me as well. And this is great for transitioning between textures. See, now that scaly rock feels like it just flows right in. And it's like the opposite of erasing away with a soft brush. Instead, we're building textures. We're extending the textures with a soft brush. Now, why did I put it all in its own layer? If I want some shadow here, for instance, I can build that in. Well, the problem is with any tool, especially a tool as powerful as Clone Stamp, we can tend to overdo it. So you can see what a big difference that makes. So putting it on its own layer allows me to adjust that layer. I can adjust its levels and make it a little bit darker. Right, play with its midtones, brighten up the highlights if I want. Being on its own layer means I can also erase away from it and not affect the pixels underneath. If I feel it's too extreme. So where can Clone Stamp help me here? Well, in weird areas where just shapes and things aren't working right. Sure, I can try to erase away from the turtle shell layer, but if I do that, look what happens. There's nothing behind it. So instead, because I don't have the overlap I need to transition, I'm going to go to my Clone Stamp layer at the very top, use Clone Stamp, maybe make it a little bit smaller as a brush, maybe a little bit harder. And I'm just going to, at a low opacity, paint and extend this texture. And remember, it's all on its own layer. So then I can burn it as well and make it more in the shadows. So I just invented texture using Clone Stamp. The best uses of it are to match textural shadows. And because I'm sampling all layers, if I use Clone Stamp here, and I put it down here to help match those textural shadows, it's going to work. Even though the color is different. And And then I can just burn those down so that looks more rocky and less smooth. And I can erase away from them if I need to. So Clone Stamp truly is the miraculous fixer-up tool, especially for making textures match. And just feel better. If I want to extend the texture of the rocks down just to cover it up, again, I can use Clone Stamp. Just find a good area to select from. Be down here. Then just build more of that rock texture in. And because I can change my target selection to wherever I want, it's really no big deal to create new content completely. So you see all that new stuff. It just makes it a lot more believable. And because it's on its own layer, you can treat it separately. By putting it all on one layer at the top, you can only do that by saying sample all layers when you use Clone Stamp. But then it saves you from having to search around and find things. So instead of trying to dodge the highlight on this layer down here, I could simply use Clone Stamp all on one layer at the top, find a highlight, and just paint it in. Find another highlight, paint it in. Find a shadow to transition it, and kind of create my own shape using other people's pixels. All right. Now, where is Clone Stamp most needed for mine? I think this jaw doesn't quite make sense, so I'm going to use some Clone Stamp here to bring these textures a little bit closer together. Though I love how strong that jaw looks, it's a little crazy as well. So just smooth it out a little bit, just stealing that texture and painting it in a little. Same thing with the lip, just put a little bit more wrinkle into it. And then for this area, instead of having to go onto all these different layers and try to figure out what I need to fill in, I'm just going to take some of this gum and paint it on to some of the lighter parts, just moving my target as I go. Now, if I was actually on the layers and replacing my pixels, I could get into trouble with this. But as it is, I'm pretty safe. Just building new content. Now, it is on top of everything, so the teeth around it are getting covered up, but it's on their own layer. So I can manipulate that by just erasing it out. So where I see I need content, it's actually better for me with Clone Stamp to put too much in and then erase out from it than not to put enough in. All right, that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to erase it away. And cut around those teeth. Ever so carefully. Okay, now how do we finish this project up? So I've got most of my transitions. I'm happy with it. I like the color. I could always put more in and keep working on it, but I think this is good for now. So the next step, is clone stamps working well? The next step is to merge everything together, but to still keep all of these layers should you need them. So I turn off my backgrounds. You don't want to have your sketch turned on. You don't want to have your gray turned on, even though it shows me it's nicely, cleanly cut out. You don't want to have your white turned on. You just want to have it be empty. You're going to go to your very top layer, which is the clone stamp layer, hold down Option, and go to Layer and say Merge Visible. You have to have Option held down, though, so that it doesn't delete all your other layers. Instead, it creates a new layer that's just everything all in one layer. Why is that good? Because then I can do adjustments to the whole thing. Maybe brighten it up a little bit, maybe deepen the shadows, brighten its highlights if you want, just to really reveal it. You can play with its colors all at once. So the whole thing now, hue saturation, I can make it more saturated, more colorful, or less. It's better to be more colorful, right? You can always take saturation away when you're compositing with a creature, putting it into different landscapes, but you can't add saturation once you've taken it away. I can even change its whole color spectrum, though I wouldn't recommend that. Okay. And then, of course, my favorite is color balance. I can add a little bit more warmth to the highlights. A little bit more cools to the shadows overall. And now it's treating it all as a whole. And of course, we tend to overdo it. So I can just turn that on and off to see what I had before, and I think that's an improvement. Remember, we're not putting any shadows underneath our creatures. They are just as they are. Okay, now I'm going to save it. File, Save As. Make sure you have your name in there. Carl Creature Collage Assignment, number 2. As a PSD, I'm going to go ahead and save it to the desktop. I know some of you aren't doing this, but it's really helpful, especially when you're uploading something to submit. So I saved that to the desktop. I know now my most updated version will be on the desktop once it saves. And I'll see it there. And then I'll move it into my folder at the end, and it will replace my older version. See how those teeth are working? Yeah, that works pretty well. Got a little bit of white around certain edges, but this is good for now. So now that I've saved it, I see that I have it on my desktop as a Photoshop. It's large enough to print. Whoa, what did I just do? It's large enough to print at its largest scale. Accidentally moved it to the trash, but I can get it out of there. I'm going to mark it green because this is what I'll come back to when I want to make alterations to it. Now I'm going to save it with the background turned off, not as a JPEG, but instead I'm going to save it as a PNG file. You might remember this from our early exercises. This will leave the background empty. And I would like you to submit it that way so I can make sure there's no artifacts floating around. And you definitely don't want to flatten it as a JPEG because that would fill all your background with white. Now, a little extra step you can do if you want is you can add some of these elements in, like your Pokemon inspiration. Now, I'm not going to for mine, because this is really the combination of 2 Pokemon inspiration. But what I would do is if it was one of them, I'd just move it down into the corner and submit that with it. All right, it's almost saved as a PNG. Once it's a PNG, I can upload it just like I